After I refused to give my dad my inheritance, he invited me to a family meeting. When I arrived, they had lawyers ready to force me to sign it over. But the moment they handed me the papers, I smiled and said, "Funny, I brought someone too. I'm Alex, 32 years old, and last month, my father invited me to a family meeting with lawyers ready to force me to sign away my $2 million inheritance. Before I tell you how I turned their ambush completely on its head, do me a favor and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I'd love to see how far this story reaches." It all started with a text message, 5 simple words that landed on my phone screen like a ticking bomb. "Family meeting tomorrow at 3. Be there." It wasn't a request. It was a summons issued by my father, Richard. This came just 1 week after I had stood my ground, refusing his demand to sign over the entire estate my grandfather had left me. That refusal had unleashed a storm of anger and guilt trips. But this felt different. This felt final. The walk up the familiar concrete path to my childhood home was surreal. Every crack in the pavement held a memory, but today, the house itself seemed hostile. The curtains in the big bay window were drawn tight, blocking out the afternoon sun. I reached for the doorbell, but the heavy oak door swung inward before my knuckles could touch it. My father stood there, dressed in a crisp polo shirt, a practiced, almost theatrical smile plastered on his face. It was the smile of a salesman closing a deal, and it never once touched his cold, calculating eyes. "Alex, punctual as always," he said, his voice a smooth, dangerous purr. "Come in, everyone's waiting." He led me into the living room, and the air hit me like a physical force, thick with tension and the cloying scent of my stepmother's potpourri. Brenda, my stepmother, was perched on the edge of the plush sofa, her posture rigid. She was wearing a silk blouse I'd never seen before, a recent purchase no doubt. Beside her, my younger brother, Leo, wouldn't look at me, his gaze fixed on a loose thread on the carpet. But my attention was immediately drawn to the 2 men occupying my grandfather's favorite wingback chairs. They were strangers, both in their 50s, exuding an aura of expensive cologne and ruthless efficiency. Their tailored suits were immaculate, their leather briefcases placed neatly by their feet. They looked like wolves who had been invited to a feast. My father, playing the role of master of ceremonies, gestured towards them. "Alex," he announced, his voice booming with false authority. "I'd like you to meet Mr. Wilson and Mr. Daniels. They're the family's legal advisors, here to help us sort through this unfortunate situation." The 2 men gave me tight, professional nods. Their eyes held a sort of detached pity, the kind you give to an animal already caught in a trap. The room wasn't a living room anymore. It was an interrogation chamber, and I was the sole person on the stand. Brenda's offer of coffee felt like an insult. I shook my head, a lump forming in my throat. Mr. Wilson leaned forward, his movements slick and rehearsed. He placed a thick, professionally bound document on the coffee table. The thud it made seemed to echo in the silent room. "Alex," he began, his tone condescendingly gentle, "your family is deeply concerned about the burden this inheritance has placed on you. We've prepared a simple solution, a voluntary transfer of assets to your father, who is, of course, better equipped to manage such a complex estate." He slid the document across the polished wood. "We just need your signature on the last page," he said, tapping a yellow sticky tab. "Then we can all move on as a family." The 4 of them stared at me, a united front of expectation. They were waiting for me to crumble, to give in as I had so many times before. But they were operating on old information. They didn't know the promise I had made. They didn't know about the portfolio I had in my own briefcase. And they certainly had no idea that their meticulously planned ambush was about to blow up in their faces. To understand the steel in my spine in that living room, you have to understand the man who put it there. My grandfather, Harold Matthews. He wasn't just a name on a will. He was the North Star of my life. My earliest memories are of his hardware store. It wasn't a sterile big-box place. It was a cathedral of possibility, smelling of fresh-cut lumber, machine oil, and the faint, sweet scent of the pipe tobacco he used to keep in his pocket. He was a builder in every sense of the word. He started with a $4,000 loan from a skeptical banker and a belief in himself. Over 50 years, he built an empire brick by brick, sale by sale. His hands were a roadmap of his life. Calloused, scarred, but incredibly gentle. He taught me how to properly hold a hammer before I could properly ride a bike. His favorite saying, the one he repeated until it was etched into my soul, was, "Value isn't something you're given, Alex. It's something you build." My father, Richard, lived his life by the opposite creed. To him, value was an inheritance, a birthright. It was something to be spent, flaunted, and consumed. As Harold's only son, he believed the fruits of his father's half-century of labor belonged to him by default. I remember one specific Thanksgiving when I was about 12. I'd worked for weeks at Grandpa's store, sweeping floors and stocking shelves, to earn enough money to buy a new video game console. I showed Grandpa the money I'd saved, and he held it in his big hand like it was a winning lottery ticket. "See this?" he said to me, his eyes shining. "This isn't just money, Alex. This is effort. This is pride." Later that evening, my father arrived, 2 hours late, showing off a ridiculously expensive new watch on his wrist. "A little Thanksgiving gift to myself," he announced to the room. I saw my grandfather look from the watch to my small roll of hard-earned cash, and his shoulders slumped. Later, I overheard him talking to my mother in the kitchen. "He doesn't get it, Patricia?" Grandpa said, his voice heavy with a sorrow that went beyond disappointment. "He thinks wealth is about what you can buy. He'll never understand it's about what you can build." That contrast defined my childhood. While my father and stepmother, Brenda, were chasing status, joining the right country club, driving the right cars, throwing parties they couldn't afford, I was finding my purpose in the back office of my grandfather's main store. He saw my interest in the ledgers and reports, and he nurtured it. Every Saturday became a masterclass in business. "Look here," he'd say, pointing to an inventory sheet. "This product, it sells fast, but the margin is tiny. This one over here, it sits for a while, but when it sells, it pays for the shelf space of 10 other items. Never fall in love with volume, Alex. Fall in love with profit." He taught me how to read people, how to negotiate with a handshake and a steady gaze, how to know when to push and when to walk away. More than anything, he taught me that your employees are your greatest asset. Pay them well, treat them with respect, and they'll take care of your customers better than you ever could, he'd say. My girlfriend, Sarah, who I started dating in my junior year of high school, saw the two worlds I was living in. She'd see the genuine joy on my face when I'd come home from a day at the store with Grandpa, and she'd see the forced smile I'd put on at the dinner table while my father complained about the stock market or Brenda planned another extravagant getaway. "It's like he's your real father," she once said quietly. She wasn't wrong. The chasm between me and my father became an uncrossable canyon the year I was accepted into college. It was a good business school, and Grandpa was over the moon. In his study, surrounded by books and the comforting smell of old wood, he handed me a check. It was enough to cover my entire first year tuition, books, room and board. "This is the most important investment I'll ever make," he said, his hand on my shoulder. He gave the check to my father, who was meant to deposit it into a new student account for me. The first tuition bill was due in August. Mid-July, I started getting nervous and checked the account balance online. It was empty. When I confronted my father, he was a master of evasion. "Bank error, son. A transfer delay. These things happen. I'm on top of it." His reassurances were as hollow as a drum. 2 days later, the truth appeared in my social media feed. It was a photo album from Brenda, titled Caribbean Dream. There they were, my father and stepmother, grinning on the deck of a cruise ship, cocktails in hand. The date stamp on the first photo was from the day after my father was supposed to have deposited my tuition check. The feeling that washed over me wasn't just anger. It was a cold, profound shame. He had stolen my future to pay for his vacation. I couldn't bear to tell Grandpa. The disappointment would have crushed him. So I swallowed my pride and my pain. I went down to the local bank and applied for a student loan. I got a job bussing tables at a local diner. I told Grandpa a generous scholarship had unexpectedly come through. I think he knew I was lying, but he never called me on it. He'd just show up at the diner sometimes, sit at the counter, and leave a $50 bill as a tip for a $10 meal. "You're a hard worker, Alex," he'd say, looking me in the eye. "That's what matters." Years passed. I graduated, got a good job in finance, and started building my own life. Grandpa's health began to decline. During one of my last visits with him at the hospital, when it was just the two of us in the quiet, sterile room, he grabbed my hand. His grip was surprisingly strong. "Alex," he rasped, his breath shallow. "I've made my arrangements. Everything is taken care of." He coughed, a dry, painful sound. "Your father, he's going to make it hard on you. He'll push. He'll guilt you. He'll threaten." "Grandpa, don't," I pleaded, my throat tight. "No, you listen," he insisted, his eyes locking onto mine with fierce clarity. "You stand your ground. You be the man I taught you to be. Promise me." "I promise, Grandpa," I whispered, squeezing his hand. "I promise." I didn't know then that this promise would become my armor. As I sat in that living room, facing their united front of greed and entitlement, it was the only thing protecting my heart. They saw a quiet, unassuming son. They had no idea they were looking at Harold Matthews's fortress. The reading of the will was the first tremor of the earthquake to come. We were all gathered in Mr. Peterson's stuffy law office. My father, Richard, was practically vibrating with a greedy energy he tried to mask with a somber expression. When Mr. Peterson read the final clause, leaving the entirety of the business and the residuary estate to me, the mask didn't just slip, it shattered. "This is a joke," Richard bellowed, leaping to his feet. "My father was senile. He was on painkillers. This is the work of a manipulator." His finger shot out, aimed directly at my heart. "You got in his head when he was sick." Brenda began a performance of loud, theatrical sobs, crying about how Harold must have been so confused. Leo, my brother, just stared at me, his face pale with a confusion that seemed genuine at the time. The meeting ended with my father screaming threats about contesting the will, about dragging my grandfather's name and mental state through the mud in court. The full-scale psychological warfare began the next morning. It was relentless and came from all sides. My father's approach was the concerned patriarch. He'd call me at 8 a.m. sharp. "Alex, son, I've had time to think. I'm not angry, just disappointed. You know your grandfather wanted the family to be secure. This burden is too much for you. Just sign the estate over to me. I'll manage it for everyone. It's the only way to keep this family from falling apart." When I'd calmly say no, the concern would curdle into menace. "Don't be a fool, Alex. You have no idea what you're getting into." Brenda's attacks were delivered via text message, little digital daggers designed to inflict guilt. "Leo is so upset he can't eat. He looks up to you, you know. I hope you're proud of yourself. Saw a photo of your father with Harold today. So sad to think how betrayed Harold would feel if he saw this division. The stress from all this could literally kill your father. His blood pressure is through the roof. Just something to think about." Then there was my Aunt Carol, my father's sister. She played the role of the neutral mediator, which made her the most insidious of all. "Alex, honey," she'd coo over the phone. "I'm just so worried about everyone. I know you have your reasons, but Richard is your father. He feels like you've chosen money over him. Maybe there's a compromise? Just a little something to show you still care about family unity." Every word was coated in a sweet poison. The confrontation that truly opened my eyes, however, came from Leo. He came to my apartment one evening, looking haggard. The usual confident swagger of the family's golden child was gone. He looked desperate. "Alex, you have to stop this," he pleaded, pacing my small living room. "You don't understand. Dad had plans for that money. Important plans." "What plans, Leo?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. "Another sports car? Another cruise?" "No, it's not like that," he insisted, running a hand through his hair. "Things are complicated. The family needs this. Dad needs this." His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and his face went white. I saw the brief flash of the caller ID, a name I didn't recognize, but the look on Leo's face was one of pure terror. He quickly silenced the call. "What's going on, Leo? Who was that?" "Nobody. It's nothing," he snapped, his voice cracking. He looked cornered. "Look, I got into a bit of a mess with an investment. Okay? A friend recommended it, it went south. I lost a lot. Dad said he'd help me, that he'd make it right once he had access to the estate. He said you were being selfish and putting us all at risk." He was practically begging me, his eyes wide. "Please, Alex, just sign the papers. For me. Dad will fix everything." He left soon after, leaving me with a gut-wrenching realization. My father wasn't just manipulating his son with words. He was using Leo's financial desperation as leverage. I knew I was missing a crucial piece of the puzzle. I needed to talk to someone who had no skin in the game, someone loyal only to my grandfather's memory. That person was Eleanor Davis. Mrs. Davis had been my grandfather's executive assistant for nearly 40 years. She was fiercely loyal, impeccably discreet, and saw everything. We met at a small, quiet cafe. I told her about the pressure, about Leo's strange desperation. She listened patiently, her expression growing more troubled. "Alex, your grandfather was a great man," she said softly. "But he was tired at the end. So tired of the fighting." She leaned in closer, lowering her voice. "Your father was relentless. He was here almost every day, asking for money, pushing papers at him to sign." She took a deep breath. "About 4 months ago, something happened. Richard came into the office with a thick legal document. He told your grandfather it was a simple update to his power of attorney to make it easier to pay bills for him. Your grandfather was exhausted that day. He almost signed it. My blood ran cold. What stopped him?" "Mr. Henderson," she said, a wave of relief in her voice. "Your grandfather's CFO. He walked in just as Harold was picking up the pen. He took one look at the document, and his face turned to stone. He asked me to step out, but I heard him through the door. His voice was like thunder. He called Richard a ghoul, a vulture. He tore up the document right there and threw him out of the office." She looked at me, her eyes filled with a deep, maternal worry. "It wasn't a power of attorney, Alex. Richard was trying to get him to sign over his majority shares in the company. He was trying to steal it all before your grandfather was even gone." She reached across the table and patted my hand. "You need to speak with Charles Henderson. He was your grandfather's shield. He knows the whole truth." I left that cafe feeling like I'd been submerged in ice water. The naivete I still held on to, the hope that this was all just a terrible misunderstanding born of grief and greed, was gone. This wasn't a family dispute. This was a criminal conspiracy. And my father was the lead conspirator. The storm hadn't just gathered. It had been raging for months, and I was only now seeing the full scale of the destruction. The revelation from Mrs. Davis shifted everything. It was no longer a matter of defending my inheritance. It was about defending my grandfather's honor. The first call I made was to a corporate litigation attorney, a woman named Catherine Albright. Her office was sparse and modern, all glass and steel, a reflection of her personality. I didn't need a gentle hand. I needed a sword and shield. I laid out the entire story, from the decades of my father's financial irresponsibility to the attempted fraud Mrs. Davis had witnessed. She listened without interruption, her face an unreadable mask, taking meticulous notes. "The legal framework is clear," she said when I finished. "They will petition the court to invalidate the will on grounds of undue influence and lack of testamentary capacity. They'll paint you as a manipulative grandson who took advantage of a sick old man. They will use character assassination." She looked up from her notes, her gaze sharp. "Our defense is the truth. We must prove, with irrefutable evidence, that your grandfather was of sound mind and that his decision was the culmination of a lifetime of your father's poor choices. We need more than just your word. We need documentation." "I know who has it," I said. My second call was to Charles Henderson, my grandfather's CFO. His voice on the phone was exactly as I remembered it from company holiday parties. Deep, calm, and resonant with an unquestionable authority. He agreed to meet me immediately. His office felt like a sanctuary of integrity. It was the same office he'd occupied for 30 years, filled with dark wood, leather-bound books on economics, and a large, framed photograph of him and my grandfather on a fishing trip, both of them grinning from ear to ear. This was a man who understood loyalty not as a convenience, but as a principle. "Your grandfather was my best friend, Alex," he said, his voice softer than on the phone. "He was also the smartest, toughest man I ever knew. What Richard tried to do to him in his final months was an abomination." He confirmed every detail Mrs. Davis had told me. Then he went further. He explained how he discovered that Richard had also been attempting to use the company's line of credit for personal expenses, forging my grandfather's signature on small expense reports, testing the system. "I shut it down, of course," Mr. Henderson said, his jaw tight with anger. "But Harold, he was heartbroken. It wasn't about the money. It was the sheer depth of the betrayal." He then stood, walked to the large, fireproof filing cabinet in the corner of his office, and unlocked it with a key he wore on a chain around his neck. He withdrew a thick, worn leather portfolio, secured with a strap. "A week after the incident with the shares, Harold gave this to me," he said, placing it on the desk with a quiet reverence. His instructions were simple. "Charlie," he said, "if my boy Alex ever finds himself in a fight he can't win, you give this to him. This is the truth. The truth is all he'll need." I opened the portfolio. Inside was a treasure trove of evidence. My grandfather's personal journal, with dated entries detailing every manipulative request for money from my father. There were copies of loan agreements Richard had defaulted on, angry letters from creditors, even a police report from a minor incident years ago where Richard had been caught using a company credit card at a casino. And at the very back, there was a sealed envelope. On it, in my grandfather's familiar script, were the words, "For Alex when he needs it most." That night, back in my apartment, the weight of that portfolio felt immense. The path forward was clear, but it was a path of destruction. I could win this fight, but the victory would mean exposing my father as a liar and a cheat, and revealing my brother's desperate secret. The family name, the one my grandfather had built into a symbol of integrity, would be dragged through the mud. Sarah found me staring blankly at the wall, the portfolio untouched on the table. She sat beside me, not saying anything, just letting her presence be a comfort. "I don't know if I can do it, Sarah," I finally whispered. This is everything he was afraid of. Public fights, family secrets laid bare. Maybe it would be better to just give them some of it. A settlement, just to make it all go away. She took my hand. It was cold and clammy. "Alex, listen to me. Your grandfather wasn't afraid of the truth. He was afraid his life's work would be squandered. He was afraid you would be bullied into betraying his trust. He didn't give you this evidence to start a war. He gave it to you so you could end one." She squeezed my hand tighter. "He trusted you to be strong enough. You can't doubt his judgment now." Her words cut through my fear and uncertainty. She was right. This wasn't an act of aggression. It was an act of defense. An act of honor. I was the shield my grandfather had put in place. The next morning, my phone chimed. It was the text from my father. The summons. "Family meeting tomorrow at 3. Be there." I took a deep breath and texted Mr. Henderson. "It's time." His reply came back in seconds. "The truth is ready." The living room felt like a pressure cooker. The air was still and heavy. I sat in the lone chair they had positioned for me, my own portfolio resting on my lap. Across from me, my father, Richard, radiated an impatient authority. Brenda was examining a microscopic speck of dust on her silk blouse. Leo was a statue of misery. The two advisors, Wilson and Daniels, had expressions of practiced, professional sympathy. They were the executioners, just waiting for the condemned to accept his fate. "So, Alex," Wilson began, his voice smooth as oil, "as you can see, the documents are quite straightforward. A simple transfer of assets to your father, who will then establish a family trust. It's the cleanest, most amicable way to honor your grandfather's presumed intentions. Presumed intentions? I repeated, my voice quiet but carrying in the silent room. Of course, Daniels chimed in. Given his frail health, it's the legal position that his final will was executed under duress. This agreement, he patted the document on the table, remedies that unfortunate situation without a costly and public court battle. A court battle would be so messy, Brenda added with a delicate shudder. Think of your grandfather's reputation. My father leaned forward, playing his final card. Son, this is your last chance to do the right thing. Be part of this family. Sign the papers. I looked at each of them one by one. The predator, the enabler, the pawn, and the hired guns. I let the silence stretch, feeling their confidence swell with each passing second. Then, I leaned forward and placed my own portfolio on the coffee table beside theirs. You're right, I said. A court battle would be messy, which is why I'm so glad we can clear everything up right here. I opened my portfolio. The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. It was subtle, a tightening, a sudden stillness. I have a few questions first, I said, pulling out a sheaf of papers. Dad, these are records of wire transfers from Grandpa's personal account to yours over the last 5 years. They total over $300,000. The memos mention things like urgent business loan, property tax emergency, and medical expenses for Leo. Yet, during that same period, your credit card statements, which I also have, show purchases at luxury resorts, a down payment on a boat, and membership fees at the new golf club. Richard's face began to turn a familiar, blotchy red. That's an invasion of my privacy. It became my business when it was used as a reason to steal from my college fund, I replied evenly. And it's about to become Mr. Wilson and Mr. Daniels' business, too. I turned to the two advisors. Gentlemen, as financial advisors, you must be concerned with the financial health of the estate. Are you aware that your client, Richard Matthews, has defaulted on 3 separate personal loans from the man whose assets you're now trying to transfer? I slid the default notices across the table. Wilson and Daniels exchanged a nervous glance. This was clearly not in their script. Our scope is limited to the current, Wilson started. Then let's widen the scope, I interrupted, my voice hardening. Let's talk about the attempted corporate fraud that took place 4 months ago. That was the kill shot. My father leaped to his feet. That is a baseless, slanderous accusation. You have no proof. I held his gaze. Are you sure about that? I leaned back, a cold calm settling over me. It's funny you're so concerned with legalities. I was too, which is why I thought it was important to have a real corporate officer present for this discussion. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. Buon koi that, tua kung mang theo nuoi kwam in. Funny, I brought someone too. The front door opened. Mr. Charles Henderson walked in. He wasn't loud or aggressive. His power was in his stillness, his absolute, unwavering integrity. He held a slim briefcase in one hand. He ignored my family completely. He walked directly to where Wilson and Daniels were sitting, his shadow falling over them. They looked up at him like startled schoolboys. Good afternoon, gentlemen, Mr. Henderson said, his voice quiet but resonating with power. My name is Charles Henderson. I am the Chief Financial Officer and a board member of Matthews Hardware Corporation. I'm here to discuss a matter of attempted securities fraud. He opened his briefcase and removed a single file, placing it on the table. It contained a copy of the fraudulent share transfer document and a sworn affidavit from himself, detailing the event. This document represents a criminal attempt to seize control of a privately held company through deception of a majority shareholder, he stated, his voice like chipping ice. As an officer of the corporation, I am bound by fiduciary duty to report such a crime to the authorities. My report is already drafted. He looked at the two advisors, his eyes cold. You are currently advising the individual who perpetrated this attempt. You are pressuring his heir in what could be construed as a continuation of that fraudulent effort. I would strongly advise you to consider your own professional and legal exposure before you say another word. The color drained from Wilson's face. He looked at Daniels, who was already discreetly packing his briefcase. The panic was palpable. Wilson shot up from his chair. "There has been a grave misunderstanding," he stammered. "We were under the impression this was a simple family matter. We are retracting our services, effective immediately." They scurried out of the house like rats from a flooding basement. The room was left in a state of stunning silence. All the power, all the leverage had shifted in the space of 3 minutes. Leo, who had been watching the entire exchange with wide, horrified eyes, finally turned to our father. His voice was a choked whisper. "Dad, it's true? You did that?" Richard didn't look at his favored son. He didn't look at anyone. He just stared at me, his face a mask of pure, undiluted hatred. His silence was the only confession we needed. The ambush had failed. The trap had sprung, but its architects were the only ones caught inside. The silence that descended upon the living room was profound and absolute. It was the silence of utter defeat. The 2 empty armchairs where the advisors had sat felt like gaping holes in the room. My father, Richard, was still frozen, his face a contorted mask of rage and humiliation. Brenda was staring at him, her mouth slightly open, the realization of just how badly he had misled her dawning in her eyes. Mr. Henderson, his duty done, gave me a single, sharp nod of approval. It was my signal to leave. I stood up, my movements calm and deliberate as I gathered my documents and placed them back in my portfolio. Every rustle of paper sounded like a thunderclap in the stillness. "I think we're done here," I said, my voice steady. Brenda's shock finally gave way to a shrill, hysterical anger. "How could you?" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "You've destroyed this family. For money. Your own father." I turned to face her, but the anger I expected to feel just wasn't there. All that remained was a deep, hollow exhaustion. "Brenda," I said, and my voice was softer than I intended. "This family was destroyed by lies and greed long before I walked in here today. All I did was finally tell the truth." I looked at my father, who still wouldn't meet my gaze. He was a king dethroned, stripped of his power and his illusions. "The will stands," I said, not as a threat, but as a simple statement of fact. "Grandpa's wishes will be honored. From this point forward, if you have anything to say, you can say it to my lawyer." With that, I turned and walked out of the room. I didn't run. I walked with the steady pace of a man who was finally free. I could feel their eyes on my back, but I didn't turn around. I walked out the front door and into the bright afternoon sun, taking a deep breath of fresh air, feeling a decade of tension begin to uncoil from my spine. I was halfway to my car when the front door flew open again. I braced myself. "Alex, wait." It was Leo's voice, raw with desperation. He came running down the walkway, skidding to a stop in front of me. His face was ashen, his eyes red-rimmed and filled with a pain that was terrifying to see. "He lied to me," he gasped, struggling for breath. "About everything. He told me the company was on the verge of collapse, that Grandpa had made a string of bad decisions, and that you were trying to hoard what little was left for yourself." I stayed silent, letting him get it all out. "The investment," he choked on the word. "It wasn't a friend, Alex. It was some guy online. A cryptocurrency scheme. It looked so real. I thought I could be smart like you and Grandpa. Make my own money." He looked down, overcome with shame. "I lost everything I had. I took out a loan. I was getting threatening calls every day. I was so scared I couldn't breathe." He looked up at me, his eyes swimming with tears. "Dad found out." He didn't yell. He was calm. He said he was disappointed, but that he would fix it. He said he had a plan to secure the family's future, and that my mess would be cleaned up as part of it. All I had to do was help him convince you to do the right thing. He used me, Alex. He used my fear against you. The full, cruel weight of my father's manipulation settled on me. He hadn't just been greedy. He had weaponized his own son's failure and terror. "I am so sorry," Leo whispered. his voice breaking completely. I was a coward. I'm so sorry. In that moment, standing on the cracked pavement of our childhood home, the last vestiges of my anger toward my brother dissolved. He wasn't a villain. He was a victim, a pawn in a game he never understood. Without thinking, I reached out and pulled him into a hug. He was stiff at first, then he just collapsed against me, sobbing with a raw, gut-wrenching grief. "It's not your fault," I said, my own voice thick with emotion. "He's our father. We're supposed to be able to trust him." When he finally pulled back, he looked lost. "I can't go back in there," he said, glancing at the house with a look of horror. "I can never go back in there. I have nowhere to go." "That's not true," I said firmly, meeting his gaze. "You have a place. You're coming home with me." The look of shocked relief that washed over his face was something I will never forget. For the first time that day, I saw a flicker of hope in his eyes. He nodded, unable to speak. As we drove away, leaving that house of secrets and lies behind us, I felt a strange sense of peace. The war was over. The hardest part was done. Now came the long, uncertain work of rebuilding from the rubble. The year that followed the confrontation was a lesson in reconstruction. The first project was rebuilding the business. My grandfather's company was solid, but it had been coasting. Under my father's brief, unofficial influence, complacency had set in. I took a full leave of absence from my finance job and poured myself into the company, starting from the ground up. I spent weeks on the road, visiting every single one of the 17 store locations. I walked the floors, I talked to the cashiers, the stock boys, the managers. I listened. I learned. The second, more complicated project was rebuilding my brother. For the first month, Leo was a ghost in my apartment. He was consumed by a deep, quiet shame. He barely spoke, barely ate. I didn't push him. I just made sure there was food in the fridge and the rent was paid. I helped him contact his creditors and consolidate his debt into a manageable payment plan. Then I gave him a job. I started him at the very bottom, working in the warehouse of our flagship store. His job was to unload trucks, sweep floors, and organize inventory. It was hard, physical, anonymous work. It was exactly what he needed. The steady rhythm of the work, the exhaustion at the end of the day, the simple paycheck that he had earned with his own sweat. It began to heal him. He started to hold his head up higher. He started talking to his coworkers, learning their names, hearing their ideas. After 3 months, the warehouse manager called me. "I don't know what you said to your brother," he said, "but he's the best worker I've got. He just redesigned our entire receiving process, cut down our unload time by 20%. I promoted him to assistant manager." Then, 6 months later, he came to me with a meticulously researched, 50-page proposal to overhaul our e-commerce platform and launch a new division focused on sustainable, eco-friendly building materials, an idea Grandpa had talked about for years but never had the energy to implement. The proposal was visionary. I gave him the budget and the title to make it happen. I wasn't just watching my brother work. I was watching him come alive. The news about my father and Brenda came in bits and pieces. Without the endless flow of Grandpa's money, their lavish lifestyle came to a screeching halt. The country club membership was canceled. The boat was repossessed. The arguments, once about what to buy next, were now about which bill to pay first. 6 months after the meeting, they sold the house and separated. My father moved into a rented condo, and I heard from my aunt that he was bitter and isolated, telling anyone who would listen how his ungrateful son had stolen his birthright. He never reached out to me. One day, an unexpected call came. It was Brenda. Her voice was hesitant, stripped of its usual sharp, confident edge. She asked if I would meet her for coffee. I was wary, but I agreed. The woman I met was different. The designer labels were gone, replaced by simple, modest clothes. The heavy makeup was gone, revealing the tired lines around her eyes. She looked her age for the first time. We sat in an awkward silence for a few minutes before she finally spoke. "I don't want anything, Alex," she said, staring into her cup. I needed to apologize." She told me about her life with my father, a life built on the constant, stressful pursuit of more. She admitted that he had lied to her about their finances, making her believe they were always on the verge of ruin. "He made me afraid," she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "And when I'm afraid, I get cruel. It's not an excuse. What I did, how I treated you, was wrong." She looked up, and for the first time, I saw genuine remorse in her eyes. "I've started seeing a therapist, trying to unpack all of it. I'm going back to school for landscape design. It's something I always wanted to do." The meeting wasn't about forgiveness. It was about witnessing a person trying to find their way out of the darkness. It was a small, fragile bridge being built over a canyon of hurt. The true culmination of that year of change came on the first anniversary of my grandfather's passing. We launched the Harold Matthews Foundation. We dedicated a substantial portion of the company's annual profits to a scholarship fund for students pursuing careers in trade skills and small business management. At the launch event, standing at a podium in a room full of hopeful students and proud families, I saw the true purpose of my grandfather's legacy. It wasn't a pile of money to be hoarded or spent. It was a resource. It was fuel to help other people build their own lives, just as he had built his. Leo stood beside me not as a broken kid, but as a confident executive. Sarah was in the front row, her eyes shining. Even Brenda was there, standing quietly at the back of the room. When I finished my speech, she caught my eye and gave me a small, respectful nod. In that room, surrounded by the promise of the future, I finally understood what it meant to be truly wealthy. It's been 2 years now. Life has settled into a new, healthier rhythm. The business is growing in ways that I know would make Grandpa proud. We're not just a chain of hardware stores anymore. We're a community partner. Leo's Green Build division is our fastest growing sector, and he has become a respected voice in the sustainable building community. The best part isn't the success, though. It's working alongside my brother every day, seeing the smart, capable man he's become. We rebuilt our relationship from the ground up, with honesty and mutual respect as the foundation. My coffee meetings with Brenda have become a regular thing. They're quiet but comfortable. She shows me pictures of the gardens she's designing. She's found a passion that has nothing to do with status or possessions. She's creating beauty in the world, and in doing so, she's finding a peace she never had before. We'll never be a close-knit family, but we found a way to be in each other's lives that is honest and kind. I have not heard a single word from my father. I know where he lives, and I know he's getting by. I've made peace with the fact that some relationships are not meant to be salvaged. His absence is a quiet space where anger used to be. Every so often, I find myself alone in my office, the same one that was my grandfather's study for so many years. I'll look at that old, black and white photo of him, a young man full of grit and dreams, standing in front of his very first store. For the longest time, I thought the inheritance was the money, the stores, the portfolio. I see now that I was mistaken. Those were just the tools. The real inheritance was the trial he knew I would face. It was a test of character, a crucible designed to forge the strength he always knew I had inside me. He left me the daunting responsibility of choosing honor over ease, truth over harmony, and integrity over family obligation. He gave me the chance to become the man he raised me to be. The ultimate lesson was that wealth is not a destination. It's a tool. It's a resource for building, for creating, for lifting others up. My grandfather's true legacy isn't measured in dollars, but in the lives that are changed for the better because of the foundation he laid. And the greatest honor of my life is getting to be the custodian of that legacy. That is the true inheritance. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice to stand up for what you believe in, even against your own family? I'd be honored to read your experiences. Please, share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss what's next.